There's a parade like no other, the kind where marching bands blare military anthems in off-key defiance, where tanks roll down dusty boulevards not for war but for theatrical display, and where citizens, terrified and smiling, wave plastic flags bearing the face of one man. That man stands atop a balcony gilded with gold, bathed in sunlight and delusion, waving as if to an audience he believes adores him. This is not a republic. It's not even a kingdom. It's a spectacle. And at the center of it all is a man who rules not by divine right, not by merit or heritage, but by sheer, unyielding ego. His name is a chant, a brand, a weapon. Aladdin. Admiral General. Supreme leader of the fictional North African nation of Wadia. A land unseen by the world, yet shaped entirely in his image. His face adorns every wall. His commands are law. And his whims, no matter how absurd, are enforced with a terrifying kind of efficiency. In his palace, he races alongside cheetahs. He rewatches his own Olympics footage, doctored so that he always wins. He rewrites dictionaries so that Aladdin replaces both positive and negative words, plunging conversations into Orwellian nonsense. His people both fear and worship him, unsure of where the boundary between flattery and survival lies. But behind the absurdity, a tension simmers. The world is watching. Wadia's nuclear program, long denied, widely mocked, is now drawing real scrutiny. The international community is restless. Sanctions loom. And the United Nations, tired of waiting, demands Aladdin appear in New York to justify his country's intentions. Diplomacy is not in his nature. But publicity is. So he agrees to go. Not to compromise. Not to negotiate. But to perform. He boards his private jet with an entourage that resembles a traveling circus, armed guards in heels, advisors whose jobs shift by the hour, and a nuclear scientist who exists solely to build him a missile that looks cooler. There's also Tamir, his scheming uncle, hiding sharp eyes behind polished smiles. Tamir has been biding his time, nodding at the supreme leader while quietly calculating his own ascent. And this trip to America? It's an opportunity. Upon arrival, the first real shift occurs. New York City does not kneel. It does not clear the streets. It honks and curses and rushes past. Aladdin, dressed in full regalia, walks among a people who see him not as a ruler, but as a joke. No one salutes. No one bows. He is reduced to a headline on a scroll, a face behind glass. And in that unfamiliar landscape of equality, the seeds of collapse are planted. The plot to dismantle him is swift. One night, in a dark alley behind the hotel, Aladdin is kidnapped. Hooded. Stripped. Shaved. Not by rebels or soldiers, but by men working for Tamir. They remove the beard, the crown, the symbols. They leave behind only the man. And then, to the world, they unveil his replacement, a dim-witted shepherd with a false beard and a script. A puppet in a uniform. The conference proceeds. The treaty is prepared. And the real Aladdin? He is left for dead in a city that neither knows nor cares who he is. He stumbles through the streets, barefaced and panicked, yelling his name to passers-by who shrug and walk away. For the first time, he's invisible. Powerless. And it terrifies him. A man who has only ever commanded is now forced to beg. For food. For help. For acknowledgement. Enter Zoe. She's small, fast-talking, and completely uninterested in his self-pity. She runs a progressive, organic, vegan co-op nestled in the heart of Brooklyn, a place filled with protest signs, rescued vegetables, and the kind of earnest activism that Aladdin finds both confusing and repulsive. But desperation makes strange alliances. She mistakes him for a refugee political dissident. And in a moment of irony so sharp it practically bleeds, she offers him a job. He takes it. He, the former supreme leader, becomes a stockboy. He bags kale. He restocks gluten-free granola. He learns the names of vegetables he never knew existed. And all the while he plots. Because his nation, his throne, is slipping away. The impostor prepares to sign the democracy treaty. His uncle smiles from the shadows. And Aladdin, humiliated and angry, begins to claw his way back. He reconnects with Nadal, the nuclear scientist he once sentenced to death for disagreeing with him. It turns out Nadal survived by sheer luck and now lives in exile among fellow escapees of Aladdin's regime. Together, they begin to piece together a plan: infiltrate the UN, expose the body double, stop the treaty, and reclaim his place at the head of a country that has never known another face. But it won't be easy. Because the man who once ruled with absolute certainty is now forced to navigate a democracy where no one listens to him. He's yelled at by customers, ignored in meetings, mocked for his ignorance. And as his rage builds, so too does a strange kind of self-awareness. It's clumsy, slow, reluctant, but it's there. He starts to see Zoe not just as a symbol of everything he disdains, but as a mirror. She doesn't flatter. She challenges. She calls him out. And for a man who's only ever known sycophants, her honesty is both infuriating and disarming. Somewhere, buried beneath the pride and paranoia, a different version of him starts to surface. It's not redemption, not yet. But it's the first crack in the armor. And in that crack, something unexpected begins to grow. Not humility. The plan begins to take shape, not with weapons or armies, but with lies and duct tape and the desperate ingenuity of two men who once thought they'd never share the same air again. Aladdin, stripped of everything but his fury and his delusions of grandeur, plots his return not from a palace but from the backroom of an organic co-op, surrounded by compost bins and handmade protest flyers. The man who once sentenced people to death by pointing at them now crouches over a crudely drawn map, arguing over entrance points and beard glue. His unlikely partner, Nadal, is more than a disgraced nuclear scientist. He's the closest thing Aladdin has to a friend now, which says less about Nadal and more about how far Aladdin has fallen. Their relationship, rooted in years of authoritarian abuse, somehow mutates into camaraderie through necessity. Together, they scheme to break into the Waldorf Astoria, where the fraudulent treaty is about to be signed by a dim-witted impostor wearing Aladdin's old uniform like a Halloween costume. But it's not just a break-in. It's a resurrection, a recoronation, a last-ditch effort to save a nation that he barely understands but wholly believes belongs to him. The disguise is key. They build a new beard from donated hair and yak wool. They stitch together a uniform from thrifted jackets and discarded medals. It's ridiculous. It's beneath him. But it works. Aladdin returns to the spotlight not with fanfare, but through a side door and a slapstick elevator mishap. He crashes through the security like a man who's forgotten how to be invisible, and when he finally bursts into the signing ceremony, panting, sweaty, triumphant, the room goes still. But humanity. The double stands there, mid-signature. Cameras flash. Delegates whisper. And for one surreal moment, two Aladdins stand side by side, each claiming legitimacy. The tension isn't just political. It's existential. One is the creation. The other, the creator. But truth has a certain weight to it, and as the impostor flounders through a basic sentence, the room begins to shift. The tide turns. The beard, the voice, the sheer theatrical presence, there's no mistaking it. The real one is back. But then, something unexpected happens. He doesn't immediately seize the moment. He doesn't bark orders or scream treason. Instead, he steps up to the podium, quiet for a moment, and begins to speak. What follows is not the speech anyone expects, not from him, not in that place. It's part confession, part sermon, part stinging satire. He begins by defending dictatorship, extolling its virtues with such absurdity that it becomes a mirror held up to the world. He mocks democracy not by attacking it, but by imitating it, pointing out how corruption, inequality, and censorship already exist in supposedly free societies. How the rich own the media, how surveillance is masked as safety, how elections are bought and sold. His words land with the weight of uncomfortable laughter. Because he isn't just ridiculing the concept of democracy. He's revealing how close so many real-world systems already are to the tyranny he embodies. And yet, somewhere in the middle of that rant, between the jokes and the barbs, there's a flicker of something real. A beat of silence. A hint of hesitation. He glances at Zoe, seated among the press, her eyes wide, confused, and for a second the performance slips. The dictator becomes the man. Just briefly. It's enough. He tears up the treaty. The moment erupts in chaos. Gasps, shouts, clapping from his own loyalists who've emerged from exile to support his return. Tamir is dragged away, screaming about oil rights and the new Wadian constitution. The puppet government crumbles in seconds. Power snaps back into place like a trapdoor slammed shut. Aladdin has reclaimed his throne. But he doesn't return home right away. No, first, there's something else, something foreign, uncharted, terrifying. Love. Because somewhere between stocking shelves and dodging Interpol, he fell for Zoe. Not in the way dictators usually fall for women, not with coercion or threats, but with something approaching vulnerability. She challenged him. She changed him. Or at least, made him wonder if change was possible. And so, in a move no one could have predicted, he proposes. It's clumsy, awkward, predictably insulting, but genuine. She says yes. They return to Wadia in a blaze of glory. Aladdin rides through the streets as before, but this time there's a different air about it. Not softer, not gentler, but more aware. His rule is restored. His face is back on every billboard. The crowds chant his name, just as they always have. But there's a wedding to plan now. And it's not just any wedding. It's the wedding of a dictator and a feminist vegan activist. The preparations are insane. Military choirs, camel parades, goat-shaped cakes. Aladdin, ever the narcissist, insists on giving a speech at the altar. It starts romantic, ends militaristic. It's everything you'd expect and more. And as Zoe walks down the aisle, flanked by protesters and secret police alike, there's a surreal sense of balance. As if two extremes have decided, against all odds, to coexist. But there's one last twist. She's pregnant. And as Aladdin grins, the question slips out, will it be a boy or an abortion? The camera freezes. The crowd gasps. The mask slips. Because after all the change, all the growth, all the stumbles toward empathy, the core of Aladdin remains intact. He is who he is. A tyrant. A lover. A fool. A mirror. The story ends not with resolution, but with recognition. That some people don't change. Not entirely. But sometimes they shift, just enough to let the light in. Enough to become something stranger, sadder, funnier. A man with absolute power who, for one brief moment, learned what it meant to be powerless, and didn't die from it. He laughed, and in that laugh, the whole world saw itself. He enters the screen like a myth already in motion, beard flowing, robe billowing, chin tilted toward the heavens as though even gravity must kneel before him. There's no subtlety to him, no attempt at blending in or playing nice. He is loud, he is absurd, and he is terrifying in the way only a man convinced of his own infallibility can be. This is Aladdin, Admiral General, beloved oppressor of the fictional land of Wadia. And from the first moment he appears, you know exactly what he wants the world to believe, that he is invincible. But that's just the surface. Because beneath the grandeur, beneath the heavy metals and gold-plated rifles, Aladdin is something stranger, something more fragile. A man whose unchecked power has turned him into a theater of one. Every word he utters is performance. Every decree a punchline. He is the living embodiment of every dictator's delusion, and yet, through the haze of satire, he begins to reveal something heartbreakingly human. He's lonely. He doesn't know it, not really. He has his guards, his scientists, his endless sea of servants. But none of them tell him the truth. None of them speak unless spoken to. No one ever challenges him. So the only voice he hears is his own, echoing back louder each day. His narcissism isn't just comedic, it's a defense. A fortress built out of lies and applause to protect the vulnerable truth that perhaps, deep down, he is not enough. His journey begins in a palace and ends in a co-op. But the transformation is not as linear as it seems. When he loses his identity, his beard, his throne, he doesn't become better. Not right away. In fact, he becomes worse, more bitter, more petty, more desperate. He flounders in a world that does not know him. But in that floundering, cracks begin to show. For the first time, he meets people who don't depend on his mercy, who don't fear him, who have no reason to pretend he is wise or just. And it is in those awkward, infuriating exchanges that something dormant begins to stir. Enter Zoe. She is everything Aladdin is not. Earthy. Kind. Infuriatingly principled. She believes in equality, in fairness, in organic farming and nonviolent protest. She wears mismatched clothes and runs a vegan collective like it's a sacred mission. But more importantly, she sees him. Not the supreme leader. Not the self-appointed god. But the man, clumsy, arrogant, terrified of vulnerability. Their dynamic is a mess, and that's what makes it work. He insults her constantly. She corrects him without flinching. He tries to impress her with stories of power and conquest. She responds with statistics on world hunger and gender equity. And somehow, through all the static, current forms, she forces him to listen, to reconsider, to try, badly, clumsily, to understand a world that doesn't revolve around him. Her character, though sometimes sidelined by the film's more outrageous moments, is a quiet axis. She's not a love interest in the traditional sense. Her purpose isn't to soften him or save him. She's there to confront, to reflect. And in doing so, she anchors the absurdity in something that feels strangely real. Her presence challenges the very idea of redemption. Can a man so corrupted by power truly change? Or does he simply adapt to survive? Nadal, on the other hand, is a different kind of foil. He represents the cost of Aladdin's rule. A brilliant nuclear scientist, once loyal, now discarded for disagreeing with the dictator's design choice on a missile. Their reunion is tense, uneasy, a collision of past cruelty and present need. Nadal doesn't forgive. But he helps. Because he, too, has something to prove. Their alliance is reluctant, born from shared desperation. But over time, it becomes something oddly genuine. Not friendship, exactly. But respect. Nadal sees through Aladdin, always has. He mocks him, lectures him, reminds him of every ridiculous and brutal decision he ever made. But he also recognizes the glimmers of potential. He sees that, given no choice, Aladdin can listen, can learn. It's agonizingly slow, interrupted by tantrums and threats, but it's there. And it's this thread, this push and pull, that reveals the real arc. Because Aladdin doesn't become good. He becomes aware. And that's a much more complicated transformation. He still lies. Still manipulates. Still leans into the grandeur of his persona. But he also pauses now, sometimes. He hesitates. He reflects. And in those fleeting moments, you catch a glimpse of something dangerous. Not the dictator, but the man he might have been if someone had told him no when he was 5. It's a reflection of how absolute power warps identity. Aladdin was not born a tyrant. He was made into one, shaped by the isolation of rule, the insulation of yes-men, the blinding echo of propaganda. The film never asks us to excuse him. But it does ask us to understand him. to see how easy it is, in the absence of opposition, to believe your own myth. And then there's Tamir, the uncle, the shadow, the usurper. Unlike Aladdin, Tamir isn't a fool. He's cold, calculated, quietly vicious. He understands the game of power, understands optics, understands that in the modern world you don't need a gold rifle. You need oil contracts and diplomatic handshakes. His plan to replace Aladdin with a puppet isn't born of ideology. It's profit. He sees democracy not as salvation, but as branding. A way to unlock Wadia's resources for foreign investors while keeping the same mechanisms of control. In that way, Tamir becomes the film's truest villain. Not because he overthrows a dictator, but because he does it for the same reasons Aladdin rules: self-interest. He doesn't want to free the people. He wants to sell them. His downfall, then, is not just poetic. It's political. A reminder that corruption wears many masks. Not all of them have beards. Even the impostor, the double, is a character in his own right. Dim-witted, wide-eyed, pliable. He is what happens when a system builds a god out of a man. A shell of obedience, willing to sign anything, say anything, be anything. In him, we see the terrifying appeal of simplicity, of rule without question, of face without substance. And finally, there's the crowd, the nameless citizens, the guards, the advisors, the ones who cheer when told, laugh when ordered, cry on cue. They aren't just background, they're the environment, the ones who allow tyranny to survive, not because they believe in it, but because it's easier than rebellion. Their silence, their fear, their forced adoration, it's not just parody. It's commentary, a reflection of how oppression often sustains itself not through brutality, but through complicity. So when they cheer Aladdin's return, it's not triumph. It's habit. And that, perhaps, is the saddest truth the film reveals. Because the dictator doesn't offer a clean resolution. It doesn't end with revolution or reformation. It ends with a wedding. With laughter. With a dictator who has changed just enough to function in a new world, but not enough to abandon who he was. It's bittersweet. Funny. Unsettling. He is still Aladdin. Still unpredictable. Still dangerous. But now, perhaps, a little more self-aware. And maybe, just maybe, that awareness is the first step toward something better. Or maybe it's just another mask. That ambiguity is what makes the characters linger. Long after the jokes fade, after the chaos settles, they remain, absurd, exaggerated, but eerily familiar. Because they are not just caricatures. They are echoes of leaders we've seen, systems we've endured, choices we've watched play out over and over again, across every stage the world has to offer. And that is where the satire ends. Not in fiction, but in reflection. Even the most outrageous films have quieter truths behind them, and some comedies, especially the loudest, most politically incorrect ones, are built on strange foundations no one sees coming. The Dictator is one such film. A blistering, unfiltered satire that stormed into theaters in 2012 with Sacha Baron Cohen at its helm. The movie wasn't just a performance, it was an act of provocation. And like everything Cohen touches, its making was as strange, controversial, and curiously brilliant as the film itself. From the start, the project was cloaked in secrecy. Sacha Baron Cohen had just come off Bruno and Borat, two films that relied almost entirely on unscripted confrontations with real people. Audiences expected his next work to follow that same guerrilla-style documentary formula. But The Dictator veered in a different direction. This time, it would be a fully scripted narrative, a departure that puzzled some, worried others, and intrigued everyone. But just because the film had a script didn't mean it followed rules. The shoot was chaotic, often improvised, and filled with moments that blurred the line between fiction and reality. One of the strangest truths? Cohen stayed in character almost the entire time, not just on camera, but off it. Cast and crew weren't interacting with Sacha. They were working for Admiral General Aladdin. He walked onto set barking orders in a thick accent, dismissing people with waves of his hand, and occasionally delivering impromptu speeches to extras as though the cameras were still rolling. It wasn't a joke. It was method acting in the most absurd way imaginable. And it led to real confusion. During outdoor shoots in New York, tourists and passers-by had no idea they were watching a film. When Cohen, dressed in full Aladdin regalia, marched through the city surrounded by uniformed guards and cheering crowds, people assumed it was a political stunt. Some believed it was a protest. Others thought it was a real foreign dignitary. The confusion wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. Cohen wanted the line between satire and reality to vanish. One particular incident stands out: the goat. During a scene involving a staged street celebration in Wadia's honor, a live goat was brought in as part of the background chaos. The animal, unbothered by fame, promptly chewed through an electrical cable and shut down power to an entire block of Manhattan for several hours. Crew members scrambled. Locals complained. The goat was unfazed. And that wasn't even the most surreal moment. That came at the Oscars. Before the film's release, Cohen appeared on the red carpet at the 2012 Academy Awards dressed as Aladdin, flanked by bodyguards and holding a golden urn supposedly containing the ashes of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il. When asked by Ryan Seacrest what he planned to do with the urn, Cohen accidentally spilled the ashes all over Seacrest's tuxedo. The moment made headlines worldwide. Was it scripted? Was Seacrest in on it? To this day, no one fully knows. Cohen never broke character. Seacrest was not amused. The stunt caused such a stir that the Academy briefly considered banning Cohen from the event entirely. They eventually relented, but only after receiving assurances that he wouldn't turn the red carpet into political theater. He did anyway. That audacity spilled into every corner of the production. Filming in New York proved especially challenging, not because of the logistics, but because Cohen refused to play it safe. He shot in live environments, often surrounded by people who weren't extras. At one point, while dressed as Aladdin and wielding a fake gold rifle, he was stopped by actual NYPD officers who had not been informed about the shoot. The misunderstanding was cleared up quickly, but not before the producers had a nervous breakdown and the cast had a good laugh. The costumes, too, had their own stories. Aladdin's military uniforms were inspired by a combination of Saddam Hussein's elaborate style, Gaddafi's flamboyant wardrobe, and Kim Jong-il's austerity. The film's costume designer reportedly studied hours of footage from real-world dictators to get the look right. Not just the design, but the posture, the gestures, the accessories. Every medal on Aladdin's chest had a backstory. One was for excellence in North Korean karaoke. Another for greatest beard among world leaders. Even the set design was steeped in satire. Aladdin's palace in Wadia was modeled after actual government buildings from authoritarian regimes, but with exaggerated touches. Portraits of him wrestling dolphins, murals of him saving babies from burning buildings, and entire wings dedicated to his own baby photos. None of this is seen for more than a few seconds on screen, but Cohen insisted they be built. The audience doesn't need to see it, he reportedly told his production designer. I need to believe it. The script went through dozens of rewrites. Writers Alec Berg, David Mandel, and Jeff Schaffer, veterans of Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, worked with Cohen to blend sharp political commentary with over-the-top slapstick. But even after scenes were finalized, they were often changed on the day of filming. Cohen would arrive with new ideas, new rants, and sometimes new characters entirely. One day's script included a camel chase. By afternoon, it had become a Segway chase. The camel, as it turned out, had a scheduling conflict. And then there was the scene with the helicopter. One of the most surreal sequences in the film involves Aladdin and Nadal speaking Arabic aboard a tour helicopter over Manhattan. As they gesture and point, tourists in the helicopter misinterpret their conversation as a terrorist plot. The scene was scripted, but the reactions were genuine. Cohen insisted on casting real tourists alongside actors, feeding them just enough context to keep their reactions authentic. The discomfort on their faces? Real. The rising panic? Also real. Production faced constant battles with censors and ratings boards. Several scenes had to be trimmed or reworked to avoid an NC-17 rating. One cut sequence reportedly involved Aladdin's human chess game turning violent in a way that made even the most hardened editors squirm. Another scene showed a montage of Aladdin's greatest achievements, including a music video that was so offensive, test audiences didn't laugh, they just stared in stunned silence. But perhaps the strangest and most telling part of the film's creation was the constant presence of real-world politics. The character of Aladdin was clearly a composite of infamous dictators, but the parallels were sharper than many realized. The timing of the film's release coincided with the Arab Spring, with real leaders being overthrown and democratic movements sweeping through parts of the Middle East. Some critics wondered if the film would trivialize the pain of real oppression. Others argued that it was exactly the right time, using satire to expose the absurdity of tyranny at a moment when the world was watching. Cohen's response was characteristically defiant. He insisted that comedy was not just appropriate, it was necessary. "Dictators aren't just dangerous," he said in an interview. "They're ridiculous. And part of their power comes from people being too scared to laugh." And laugh people did. Despite its provocations, or perhaps because of them, the film found an audience. It performed well at the box office, pulling in over $175 million worldwide on a modest budget. It didn't win awards. It didn't pretend to. But it embedded itself in the culture with a kind of reckless energy no one else dared touch. The DVD extras, too, revealed hidden gems. An entire deleted subplot involved Aladdin launching his own brand of soft drinks, Wadia Cola, which caused hallucinations and occasional seizures. Another cutscene showed Aladdin trying to adapt to American life by becoming a children's birthday party entertainer, accidentally traumatizing a group of 7-year-olds with a war story. In the years since its release, The Dictator has remained something of a strange artifact. Not quite a mockumentary, not fully a narrative, it sits at the intersection of satire and spectacle. And behind every absurd scene lies a production that was just as unpredictable. From goats that chewed cables to actors who never broke character, from Oscar dust-ups to NYPD shutdowns, the making of the film was, in many ways, as much of a circus as the movie itself. But that was the point. Because when you make a movie about a man who believes the world is his toy, you can't build it like anything else. You have to let the chaos in. You have to embrace the absurd. And if, along the way, a goat shuts down Manhattan or the Academy threatens to bar your lead actor, well, that just means you're doing it right. There are films that sneak up on you with their depth, slipping past your defenses under the guise of comedy until you're left laughing and unsettled all at once. The Dictator never pretends to be subtle. It storms into the room wearing epaulets and aviators, shouting into a golden megaphone. Yet hidden behind its audacity, tucked between the explosions of vulgarity, the firestorms of political satire, and the sheer force of Sacha Baron Cohen's performance, there lies a sharpness, a purposeful sting. A film that, if you're willing to wade through the chaos, offers something disturbingly reflective. Its first significant moment is one that instantly sets the tone. We meet Aladdin not in vulnerability or introspection, but at the height of his absurd, unearned glory. The national anthem of Wadia plays in triumphant crescendo, a choral ode to narcissism. Children sing his praises. Scientists quake in fear. Athletes throw races so he can win. The audience laughs, but what exactly are they laughing at? Not just the man, but the system, the cult of personality, the way power bends reality around itself until it reflects nothing but the ruler's ego. It's funny because it's true, uncomfortably true. Critically, This scene functions as more than just an introduction, it's a thesis. This is not just a story about a tyrant. It's about the machinery that props tyrants up. The mechanisms that allow absurdity to pass as normal, to be sanctioned, celebrated, and feared. Cohen doesn't just parody one dictator. He creates a caricature of all of them, distilled into one man who is too ridiculous to be real and yet too familiar to dismiss. That's where the satire cuts deepest, in the recognition. The plot accelerates when Aladdin is summoned to New York to address the United Nations. This moment, on the surface, seems ripe for fish-out-of-water comedy, and it is. But underneath it, there's a deeper jab at the way international diplomacy often treats tyrants. Aladdin is not banned. He is invited. He is given a platform. Welcomed with deference. The irony is not lost on the film. The world, it suggests, is more comfortable negotiating with monsters than confronting them. Better to take a photo with the tyrant than to dismantle the system that enabled him. The turning point, however, comes with Aladdin's kidnapping and beard shaving. Stripped of his identity, his face, his title, his costume, he becomes just another man. This is where the narrative pivots from satire to existential farce. The dictator becomes anonymous, powerless, forgotten in the chaos of New York City. The fall is not dramatic, it's humiliating. He begs. He stumbles. He's mocked by passers-by. And in that descent, the film reveals its most biting commentary. That power, without presentation, is meaningless. From a critical standpoint, this shift is the film's most daring move. It invites empathy without inviting redemption. It doesn't ask us to forgive Aladdin. It simply dares us to observe him when no one is watching. To see how quickly a man collapses when the world stops reflecting his illusion. And this is where the emotional resonance starts to take root. Not in his reformation, but in his confusion. In the emptiness of a man who has never heard no. Zoe's arrival further complicates this. She's not just a foil, she's an ideological counterweight. She represents everything Aladdin mocks: equality, empathy, liberal idealism. But more importantly, she exists outside his narrative. She has agency, conviction. She cannot be bought, intimidated, or manipulated, at least not easily. Their dynamic is uncomfortable because it is not romantic in the traditional sense. It's oppositional, philosophical. She forces him to see the world not as a kingdom to be ruled, but as a space shared by people with voices of their own. The critical tension between them doesn't ask, will he win her over? It asks, can he understand her world without destroying it? The scene where Aladdin begins working at the co-op is particularly revealing. He is now a man taking orders, serving customers, and being corrected at every turn. His incompetence is hilarious, but it also reveals something raw. He doesn't know how to be human. He doesn't understand compromise or community or cooperation. And yet, slowly, he learns. Not because he wants to, but because he has no choice. These scenes, while played for laughs, are crucial to the film's thematic undercurrent. They explore the idea that tyranny is not just a political structure, it's a psychological one. Aladdin's dictatorship is not only over his country but over himself. He has isolated his mind from contradiction, built walls against self-doubt. Working with others begins to crack those walls. The humor becomes a vehicle for something more profound, a man learning that the world does not owe him obedience. But this growth is not linear. The film resists easy redemption. Aladdin makes progress, then regresses, then lashes out, then apologizes. It's messy, human, and critically, it reflects the reality that power does not relinquish itself easily. The habits of dictatorship are hard to break, not just for governments, but for individuals. Even when stripped of everything, he still dreams of a return to the throne. Which brings us to the film's most striking moment, the climactic speech at the United Nations. It is here that the dictator fully reveals its teeth. What begins as a boastful rant becomes something more unsettling. Aladdin delivers a passionate defense of dictatorship that, line by line, morphs into a critique of Western hypocrisy. He describes autocracy as a system where a tiny elite controls wealth, where elections are manipulated, where surveillance is justified by fear, and as he speaks, the audience shifts uncomfortably. Because he's not describing Wadia anymore. He's describing us. This moment lands with brutal efficiency. It turns the joke inside out. The laughter catches in the throat. The satire becomes a mirror. And the film, for all its absurdity, suddenly feels devastatingly real. It's a reminder that tyranny is not always loud. Sometimes it wears a suit. Sometimes it holds a press conference. Sometimes it smiles. From a critical perspective, this is the film's greatest achievement. It uses the mask of comedy to speak truths too sharp for a straight drama. It doesn't plead for reform. It doesn't preach. It mocks. Mercilessly. And in doing so, it delivers its message more effectively than any speech ever could. Yet even as Aladdin tears up the treaty and reclaims his position, the film does not celebrate. It satirizes the cycle. His return is triumphant in form but hollow in substance. He is back on his throne, yes, but now with slightly more awareness. He still holds power. Still fears opposition. But he has seen what it's like to be powerless. To be mocked. And that memory, faint as it may be, lingers behind his eyes. The wedding scene that follows is both a punchline and a prophecy. He marries Zoe. Declares reforms. Promises progress. And then, casually, instinctively, he asks whether their unborn child will be a boy or an abortion. The line is shocking. Jarring. Funny in its audacity, tragic in its implication. Still fears opposition. But he has seen what it's like to be powerless. To be mocked. And that memory, faint as it may be, lingers behind his eyes. The wedding scene that follows is both a punchline and a prophecy. He marries Zoe. Declares reforms. Promises progress. And then, casually, instinctively, he asks whether their unborn child will be a boy or an abortion. The line is shocking. Jarring. Funny in its audacity, tragic in its implication. It underlines the film's central truth. Change is not a straight line. And some men, no matter how far they fall, will always return to the thrones they build inside themselves. Audience reception reflected this complexity. Some viewers loved the film's unflinching satire. Others recoiled from its crude humor. Critics were divided. Some praised its sharpness. Others dismissed it as tasteless. But no one walked away indifferent. And that, in a film about political apathy and authoritarian blindness, feels like a victory. Because the dictator does not ask to be loved. It asks to be seen. In its laughter, it holds grief. In its chaos, it reveals order. And in its most absurd moments, it dares to ask real questions about power, truth, and the stories we tell ourselves to avoid confronting both. That's where its resonance lives. Not in the punchlines, but in the silences between them. The unease that follows the laughter. The realization that sometimes the clown is the only one brave enough to tell the truth. Sometimes chaos isn't just a product of the story. It's woven into the very fabric of how a film is made. And in the case of The Dictator, the madness didn't end with the script. It spilled over into every day of production, every costume fitting, every take that spiraled into uncontrollable laughter or confusion. The final film may have presented Admiral General Aladdin as a singular force of absurdity, but behind the scenes, it took a symphony of creative mayhem to bring him to life. This was a production unlike any other. Part political circus, part high-stakes satire, and part guerrilla theater. And the stories behind its creation are just as surreal, strange, and unforgettable as the man at its center. From the outset, the energy on set was clear. This wasn't going to be a film made by the book. Sacha Baron Cohen didn't simply play Aladdin, he became him. Not in the sense of an actor preparing emotionally, quietly internalizing the role. No, Cohen brought the character to life from the first day of rehearsal to the last shot of filming. He stayed in character, spoke in the accent, wore the medals and uniform, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Cast and crew quickly learned that asking Sacha a question might earn them a blank stare. But if they addressed the supreme leader, they'd get a response, usually laced with bizarre threats or compliments about their excellent bone structure for a peasant. Cohen's commitment was both exhilarating and exhausting for those around him. Every day on set felt like stepping into a satire where reality was just slightly out of reach. But it wasn't just a stunt. It set the tone. The crew worked not under a leading man, but under a dictator who made comedy feel dangerous, unpredictable, alive. Filming primarily took place in New York City, a location as chaotic as the film's energy required. The production ran into one unique challenge after another, especially when shooting outdoor scenes. Because Cohen looked so bizarre, fully costumed, often flanked by fake military guards, passers-by often didn't realize a movie was being filmed. In some cases, they assumed an actual political protest or event was unfolding. One day, while shooting a scene in front of a shop, traffic was halted by a spontaneous crowd that had gathered, thinking a real Middle Eastern dignitary had arrived unannounced. It wasn't until a production assistant shouted, "It's Sacha!" that the tension broke and everyone burst into laughter. The unpredictability was part of the design. Director Larry Charles, who previously worked with Cohen on Borat and Bruno, knew that tight control would kill the spirit of the film. So he encouraged improvisation, letting scenes unravel naturally. This approach worked particularly well during the co-op sequences, where Aladdin fumbles through working at a Brooklyn health store. Many of those moments were unscripted. Cohen riffed with real customers who were unaware they were interacting with an actor. Some thought he was a performance artist, others believed he was part of a reality show. A few just shook their heads and left, unknowingly walking out of a Hollywood movie scene. Faris, who played Zoe, had to navigate this chaos while staying grounded. Her role demanded she be both foil and anchor, and according to crew members, she often broke character during takes, not from frustration, but from stifled laughter. Cohen would often go off-script just to test her reactions, blurting out increasingly ridiculous lines that would leave the entire set in stitches. Faris, who has impeccable comedic instincts herself, learned to fire back just as fast, creating some of the film's most electric exchanges. Then there was Ben Kingsley. Yes, Sir Ben Kingsley, playing Tamir, Aladdin's conniving uncle. Kingsley, a veteran of Shakespeare and historical epics, embraced the absurdity with unexpected enthusiasm. But even he wasn't prepared for the improvisational tornado Cohen brought to set. In one scene, where Tamir and Aladdin argue over the future of Wadia, Cohen delivered a speech that veered wildly off-script, comparing democracy to a slow-moving plague of vegan spiders. Kingsley, ever composed, waited for the cue to jump back in. But instead, he leaned into the moment and delivered a line that wasn't in the script, earning applause from the crew. "When you work with Sacha," Kingsley later said, "you must prepare for the script to be more of a suggestion." Props and costume design also became part of the comedy engine. Aladdin's uniforms were hand-tailored to be as gaudy and exaggerated as possible. Each was adorned with fake medals for fictional accomplishments, such as Winner of Best Beard 2003 and Top Supreme Leader in a supporting role. His golden gun was custom-made, too shiny for most lenses to photograph properly, requiring adjustments on set lighting just so it didn't reflect light like a disco ball. His palatial bedroom was decorated with posters of himself in action hero poses, wrestling bears or holding babies while explosions filled the background. And yes, there were actual camels. In one of the film's deleted scenes, eventually released on the DVD extras, Aladdin rides through Central Park on a camel as confused joggers and tourists stare. Getting the camel into the city, through permits, and onto the grass was a logistical nightmare. and the camel, unimpressed by fame, refused to walk straight. Eventually, they had to digitally adjust the path of the ride so it didn't look like Aladdin was constantly swerving toward trees. Another standout production moment came during the helicopter tour scene. In the film, Aladdin and Nadal speak in Arabic while pointing at buildings and making gestures, leading two American tourists to believe they're plotting an attack. To capture the genuine reactions of the tourists, the filmmakers cast real civilians alongside actors, feeding them minimal context. What they didn't expect was just how panicked the participants would become. One woman started crying, another tried to alert the pilot. The scene, while controversial, captured the very paranoia it was satirizing, and did so unscripted. Then came the moment no one forgot: the Oscars. In the lead-up to the film's release, Cohen wasn't content with traditional press. He appeared in full Aladdin costume at the 2012 Academy Awards, carrying an urn that he claimed held the ashes of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-il. During a red carpet interview with Ryan Seacrest, Cohen accidentally spilled the ashes all over Seacrest's tuxedo. The chaos was immediate. Security was confused. Seacrest was stunned. The world watched. It was the perfect meta-moment, turning an award show into a scene worthy of the film itself. Even post-production had its quirks. The editing room became a battleground of choices: which takes to use, which improvisations to keep, which jokes went too far. Entire scenes were cut because test audiences either didn't laugh or laughed too hard for the wrong reasons. One such sequence involved a Wadian game show, hosted by Aladdin, where the answers to every question were Aladdin. It played well with some crowds, poorly with others, and was ultimately trimmed for pacing. Sound mixing also posed unexpected challenges. Cohen's accent, while hilarious, sometimes obscured punchlines. Dialogue had to be cleaned up, re-recorded, and layered with careful timing so the rhythm of the jokes still landed. The score, composed by Baron Cohen, Sacha's brother, blended Middle Eastern motifs with militaristic bravado, mirroring Aladdin's delusions of grandeur. One track even used real national anthems layered under fake lyrics, crafted in gibberish that mimicked Arabic but made no actual sense, a subtle way to keep the satire sharp without targeting any one culture. And the film's release? That was a show in itself. Instead of a traditional press tour, Cohen, as Aladdin, went on a global tour of mischief. He gave interviews in character, made grand proclamations on talk shows, and issued fake decrees banning various celebrities from Wadia. In London, he held a press conference demanding that the British royal family abdicate in favor of a more stylish, darker-skinned supreme leader. In Italy, he called the Pope his assistant in faith. Each stunt generated headlines, memes, and exactly the kind of attention the film's producers wanted. What emerged from all this wasn't just a movie. It was an event. A scripted satire that felt like a live performance, a staged comedy with the rawness of a social experiment. The film's very existence questioned where performance ends and politics begin. It blurred the boundaries between fiction and reality in a way few films had dared to do before, or since. And behind it all was a team that had to constantly adapt. Directors, producers, actors, designers, all caught in Cohen's vortex of creation. It was exhausting, exhilarating, unpredictable. But in the end, it was unforgettable. Because The Dictator wasn't just made. It was unleashed. There's something uniquely disorienting about a film that plunges you into the ornate excess of a made-up dictatorship one moment and the gritty realism of a Brooklyn co-op the next. The Dictator thrives on that kind of tonal whiplash, and nowhere is that more evident than in its settings and cinematic language. From opulent palaces in fictional Wadia to the anonymous alleys of New York City, the film weaves a visual tapestry that heightens both its satire and its emotional undercurrent. The locations aren't just backdrops, they are integral to the absurd, volatile journey of its central character. It begins in Wadia, a country that doesn't exist on any map, yet somehow feels eerily familiar. The opening scenes do not whisper exposition, they blare it like a military parade. Gold-domed buildings stretch toward the sky, plastered with banners bearing the supreme leader's face. Statues of Aladdin, cast in poses borrowed from historical tyrants and reimagined through pure narcissism, loom over the capital like silent sentinels of propaganda. Every inch of Wadia is dripping in symbolism, a world so cartoonishly controlled that even nature seems coerced into submission. The palace, with its over-the-top design, embodies excess without restraint. Wide-angle shots show towering columns, lavish halls, and rooms whose only purpose appears to be housing portraits of Aladdin in various heroic stances: wrestling animals, cradling babies, riding tanks. Cinematographer Larry Charles frames these scenes with a stillness that emphasizes their absurdity. There's no shaky cam, no handheld rawness, just a steady, regal framing that mirrors the dictator's delusions of grandeur. The aesthetic is part Versailles, part Saddam-era Baghdad, and part Saturday morning cartoon. But that stability vanishes the moment the film leaves Wadia. When Aladdin arrives in New York City, the tone shifts with surgical precision. Gone are the symmetrical compositions and gleaming corridors. Suddenly, the camera moves with unease. There's handheld urgency, tighter frames, a gritty realism in the textures of the city's concrete and glass. The scale of the world expands, and Aladdin is swallowed by it. The tall buildings dwarf him. The crowds ignore him. And the lens captures not just his isolation, but his irrelevance. The production made brilliant use of real locations throughout New York: Times Square, Central Park, alleyways behind midtown hotels. These aren't dressed-up sets. They're active, breathing spaces. The city doesn't pause for Aladdin, and that indifference becomes a visual metaphor. The grandeur of Wadia is gone. Here, he's just another man in a costume. The cinematography leans into that discomfort. Harsh daylight exposes every imperfection. At night, the shadows feel heavier. It's a cold, indifferent America that meets Aladdin, not hostile, just uninterested. The co-op where Zoe works is a masterstroke of production design. In stark contrast to the bombast of the palace, the store is cramped, cluttered, and defiantly unpolished. Baskets of kale and quinoa fight for space with protest signs and fair trade chocolates. The lighting is flat and practical. The colors are muted: greens, browns, and soft yellows, all evoking warmth, community, and counterculture. It's a space built on inclusion, yet completely foreign to a man who's never heard the word consent without following it with is mandatory. The cinematography in the co-op reflects this collision. The camera often stays at eye level, using over-the-shoulder shots that make us feel like part of the conversation. There's intimacy in the framing. Intentional or not, the co-op becomes a place of reckoning. It strips Aladdin of spectacle and forces him into reality. The store isn't just where he hides. It's where he begins to see. But the film never lets you forget where he came from. Even as he stocks shelves or grumbles over tofu, we're occasionally reminded, through flashbacks, daydreams, or quick edits, of the absurdity he left behind. A golden rifle. A leopard on a leash. A propaganda video with him rapping in auto-tuned Arabic. These moments are shot with saturated color, exaggerated angles, and a polish that contrasts sharply with the rawness of New York. They're cinematic intrusions, reminders of the fantasy clashing with the real world. That tension reaches a fever pitch in the scenes set during Aladdin's attempted infiltration of the peace treaty conference. Here, the camera once again adopts a more composed style, reminiscent of spy thrillers. The lighting sharpens. The focus tightens. We move through corridors with purpose, like we're part of the mission. The film's visual tone shifts to match the stakes, even as the absurdity escalates. It's a brilliant contrast, a man dressed like a military mascot sneaking through vents and disguising himself as a waiter, shot like he's James Bond. One of the most visually striking scenes is the confrontation at the UN. Aladdin, now bearded once more, walks into the hall draped in faux authority. The setting, clean, modern, diplomatic, is the ultimate stage for satire. Here, surrounded by international delegates and flashing cameras, the film reaches its visual crescendo. The lighting is pristine. The camera movements are smooth, deliberate. For a moment, it almost looks like a real political drama. And that's intentional. Because Aladdin's speech is delivered not in chaos but in composure. It's one of the few scenes where the camera doesn't flinch. It doesn't pan away. It holds on him, steady, as he defends dictatorship in a monologue that is both hilarious and horrifying. The juxtaposition is jarring, this clownish figure framed like a world leader, delivering lines that echo real-world injustices. The visuals dare you to laugh, and then ask why you're laughing. Music also plays a subtle role in shaping the film's tone. The score, composed by Sacha Baron Cohen, is a fusion of Middle Eastern rhythms, military marches, and pop parody. In Wadia, the music is triumphant and synthetic. Marching bands filtered through keyboards, choirs singing nonsense in anthemic tones. In New York, the score pulls back, giving way to diegetic sounds, city noise, overhead announcements, the hum of fluorescent lights in the co-op. The absence of grandeur becomes part of the satire. Even costume design contributes to the film's layered visuals. Aladdin's uniforms are designed with absurd detail. Epaulets that could blind, medals that mean nothing, shoes that scream dictatorship chic. But once he loses those clothes, he's forced into anonymity. The sweatsuits he wears at the co-op, the borrowed jackets, the ill-fitting pants, all remind us that identity can be as flimsy as fabric. And yet, when he reclaims his look near the film's end, it feels like armor returning to a warrior. Not because we root for him, but because we understand the power of performance. The use of mirrors is another quiet but consistent visual motif. Throughout the film, Aladdin is frequently shown in reflection. Be it in the polished floor of his palace, the storefront window of the co-op, or the bathroom mirror where he contemplates shaving. These shots suggest something deeper than vanity. They hint at self-awareness, at a man who, for all his bravado, might be starting to see himself, even if he doesn't yet know what that reflection means. And then there's the wedding scene. A ridiculous, extravagant affair that tries to combine Wadian tradition with Brooklyn progressivism. The result is a visual explosion of contradiction. Soldiers in formation next to vegan platters. Protesters holding signs while tossing flower petals. Aladdin in full regalia beside Zoe in a dress made of recycled hemp. The cinematography leans into the absurdity. Wide shots to show the scale, quick cuts to capture reactions, close-ups on the bride and groom exchanging expressions that mix horror with affection. The final shot of the film encapsulates everything. Aladdin stands tall, holding Zoe's hand, making a speech that seems, for one fleeting second, sincere. And then he ruins it. A joke, tasteless and perfect, derails the moment. And the camera lingers just long enough to catch the collective exhale, the sigh of a world that dared to hope, only to remember who they were dealing with. It's not a sad ending. But it's not triumphant either. It's honest. And that honesty is what makes the visual language of the film so effective. It's not trying to trick you into rooting for Aladdin. It's trying to show you how easy it is to fall for him, for the spectacle, the costume, the voice. How power, when dressed up just right, can almost look like leadership. So yes, the dictator is funny, loud, ridiculous. But look closer at its settings, its cinematography, its crafted contrasts, and you'll find something sharper. A visual world that reflects not just a tyrant, but a culture's willingness to embrace one. And that, more than any joke, is what lingers long after the credits roll. Sometimes, making a film feels like constructing a careful symphony, notes perfectly placed, tempo measured, harmony aligned. And then there's The Dictator, which felt less like a symphony and more like a wildly improvised jazz solo performed in a thunderstorm while riding a camel through Midtown Manhattan. Behind the scenes, it was a film stitched together from chaos, crafted through mischief, and brought to life by a cast and crew who never really knew what was coming next, but somehow that made it work. From the very beginning, The energy on set wasn't just unpredictable. It was manufactured that way, by design. Sacha Baron Cohen didn't treat the role of Aladdin as a mask to wear and remove between takes. No, he stayed in character for months, on and off the set, transforming everything from cast rehearsals to catering lines into surreal extensions of the film's universe. If you passed Cohen in the hallway, he wouldn't nod politely or shake your hand. He'd greet you with a militaristic salute and an insult about your haircut. And if you happened to ask a genuine question, you might get a full-blown political monologue in response, delivered in Aladdin's gravelly, self-important tone. For the crew, this presented both a challenge and an opportunity. How do you give direction to someone who won't drop character? How do you prepare lighting or blocking when a scene might morph on the spot into something completely unrecognizable from the script? Director Larry Charles, no stranger to Cohen's particular brand of chaos after working with him on Borat and Bruno, took a hands-off approach. He let scenes breathe, encouraged improvisation, and maintained a kind of open-set policy where ideas could come from anywhere, and often did. The atmosphere among the cast was, for lack of a better word, electric. Anna Faris, cast as the grounded and socially conscious Zoe, found herself constantly battling to keep a straight face. Her scenes with Cohen were filled with spontaneous detours. She'd come prepared to deliver her lines, only to find Cohen ranting about biodegradable condoms or Wadian yogurt brands he'd just invented. One day, during a tender moment meant to be their first emotional connection, Cohen suddenly dropped to his knees and declared his undying love for Zoe's perfectly shaped elbows. The crew had to reshoot the entire scene because Faris collapsed into laughter. Sir Ben Kingsley, the most unexpected addition to a cast built on satire, quickly became the unofficial straight man. His gravitas gave the film an anchor. But even he wasn't immune to the lunacy. In one memorable scene, Cohen, improvising furiously, began serenading Kingsley with a made-up Wadian national anthem while spinning in circles. Kingsley, ever the consummate professional, waited for a pause, and then joined in, harmonizing with a perfect baritone. That take, unfortunately, never made it into the final cut, but it became the stuff of legend among the crew. Then there were the cameos. Cohen's penchant for secrecy extended to surprise appearances. Actors and celebrities were sometimes brought to set without full knowledge of what the scene entailed. One day, John C. Reilly arrived, having only been told he'd be playing a minor American torturer. He was handed a fake CIA badge, a cattle prod, and told to improvise. The result? A scene so outrageous it had to be trimmed for release. Even Reilly, known for his fearlessness in comedy, reportedly paused between takes and said, "I have no idea what I just did." One of the biggest challenges during filming was maintaining control during public scenes. Unlike traditional productions where streets are closed off and controlled environments are built, many of the New York City scenes were shot with hidden cameras or minimal crew presence to maintain spontaneity. Cohen, dressed as Aladdin, would stroll into Times Square, give speeches, or stage security incidents, while unsuspecting bystanders watched in bewilderment. The risk was constant. At one point, a nearby construction crew mistook the film crew for a protest group and called the police. A patrol car arrived mid-take, and the officers, seeing Cohen in full costume, initially assumed it was an actual diplomatic event. That wasn't even the closest call. While filming the rooftop scene where Aladdin declares his plan to reclaim his identity, the wind picked up. One of the enormous Wadian flags, rigged as a prop, detached from its mount and flew off the roof, landing several stories down in the middle of an actual brunch spot. Luckily, no one was injured, but the incident resulted in a temporary shutdown and a heated call with the building's management. Cohen later joked that it was the first time Wadia had ever invaded New York airspace. Even interior scenes weren't immune to madness. The Wadian palace interiors, though shot on sound stages, were adorned with some of the most bizarre set design ever approved by a mainstream studio. Gold statues of Aladdin in provocative poses, an entire hallway filled with Wadian Nobel Prizes, and murals of the Supreme Leader depicted as a superhero rescuing world leaders from disaster. One running gag among the crew was hiding increasingly ridiculous items in the background, like a family portrait of Aladdin with a unicorn, or a calendar where every day was marked as his birthday. The dynamic between Cohen and the production designers was playful yet demanding. Cohen had a vision for the aesthetic of Wadia, over-the-top, excessive, and painfully self-congratulatory. The set decorators were given reference materials not just from real-world dictatorships, but from fashion magazines, luxury catalogs, and children's cartoons. He wanted a world that looked almost believable, but just strange enough to feel invented. "It's not enough to mock power," Cohen reportedly said. "You have to make it ridiculous enough that people forget they ever respected it." The crew worked long hours, but morale was high. Every day brought something unexpected. One afternoon, during what was supposed to be a break between scenes, Cohen appeared in full costume carrying a tray of falafel. He went from trailer to trailer offering snacks and issuing loyalty tests to the crew. Anyone who hesitated to accept the food was threatened with lifetime banishment from the glorious Republic of Wadia. Everyone laughed, then accepted the falafel. Post-production had its own share of surprises. The editing room became a battlefield of choices. With hours of improvised footage, multiple versions of scenes, and alternate punchlines for nearly every joke, the editors had the Herculean task of shaping it into a coherent film. The final cut was a blend of structured story and spontaneous chaos, an achievement that only worked because of the raw material they had to play with. One particular challenge was the film's climactic speech. Cohen delivered it differently in nearly every take. Some versions leaned into comedy. Others veered toward genuine political critique. The final version that made it into the film was a hybrid, sharp enough to sting, but funny enough to disarm. And that balance, according to the Post team, was the hardest thing to achieve. Despite all the madness, the cast and crew came away from the film with a rare kind of camaraderie. It was a project built on risk, on pushing buttons, on blurring the line between satire and sincerity. And through it all, the people who brought it to life found themselves laughing just as often as the audiences eventually would. Because behind every outrageous scene, behind every goat on a leash and every gold-plated AK-47, there was a team of storytellers, willing to step into the unknown, to dance with discomfort, and to find truth in the unlikeliest of places. And in that way, The Dictator was never just a film. It was a revolution, wrapped in laughter, and born in chaos. Some films tiptoe around their messages, wrapping them in layers of subtlety and metaphor. The Dictator does the opposite. It kicks down the door wearing a gold uniform and aviator sunglasses, shouting its themes through a megaphone made of satire. Yet, beneath the crudeness and chaos, the movie delivers a surprisingly complex commentary on power, identity, freedom, and the absurd machinery that props up modern tyranny. It might not whisper, but it speaks clearly, and when it wants to, it cuts deep. At the heart of the story is the illusion of control. Admiral General Aladdin is a man who believes he is God's gift not just to Wadia, but to the entire world. His every word is law. His every whim, no matter how dangerous or ridiculous, is enforced without hesitation. But what the film reveals early, and reinforces throughout, is that this control is a fiction. His power is built on fear, not respect. On performance, not substance. He lives in a palace where no one tells him the truth. Where science is rigged to his preferences. Where maps are redrawn to glorify his ego. This is more than just political satire, it's a psychological dissection of the authoritarian mindset. The movie asks, what happens when a man who controls everything is forced to confront a world he can't control? That's the central shift when Aladdin is stripped of his identity. His beard is shaved. His uniform taken. His authority erased. Suddenly, he is not the dictator. He is a man in sweats, lost in a foreign city, invisible to everyone around him. The symbolism here is potent. The beard isn't just facial hair, it's his crown, his mask, his power. When it's gone, so is his armor. The man underneath is unformed, flailing, and, most importantly, human. This transformation leads us to one of the film's core themes: identity versus persona. Aladdin has never existed outside of his title. He is a construct, a myth he's spent years curating. Without the trappings of leadership, he doesn't know who he is. That's why his journey is not just physical, it's existential. Working at the Brooklyn Co-op, dealing with customers, being bossed around by Zoe, all of it forces him into a terrifying position: being ordinary. And for someone raised to believe he's extraordinary, that's its own kind of death. The co-op itself is symbolic of the antithesis to tyranny. It's messy, democratic, egalitarian. Decisions are made by committee. Mistakes are shared. Power is distributed. It's also chaotic and inefficient, which the film doesn't shy away from. But it's real. People speak their minds. They argue. They listen. In this microcosm, Aladdin sees a kind of freedom he's never known: messy, unpredictable, alive. Freedom is another major theme, and the film explores it with biting humor. Aladdin believes he is free because he can do anything he wants. But that's not freedom, it's unchecked power. True freedom, the film argues, is shared. It involves limits, dialogue, compromise. That's why democracy, even when flawed, is portrayed as the higher ground. It isn't perfect, but it allows for evolution. Aladdin's regime is stagnant, frozen in his delusions. The co-op, for all its clutter, grows. This ideological clash is embodied in Zoe. She is more than a love interest, she is a challenge. A walking contradiction to everything Aladdin represents. She is kind but firm, idealistic but pragmatic. She doesn't flinch when he mocks her. She doesn't yield when he shouts. She treats him not as a ruler, but as a man. And in doing so, she forces him to confront a terrifying idea: that he could be something else. That he could change. Symbolically, Zoe represents conscience. Not moral superiority, but the persistent voice that says, "You can be better." She never asks Aladdin to abandon who he is. She asks him to consider why he is that way. That's what makes their dynamic so powerful. It's not about romantic chemistry. It's about philosophical friction. The film also explores the theme of perception. Aladdin's regime thrives on propaganda. Statues, slogans, rewired dictionaries. It's all about shaping how others see him. But in New York, no one sees him. He's ignored, dismissed, laughed at. His carefully curated image is worthless without context. This leads to a profound realization: power depends on recognition. A tyrant with no audience is just a man shouting into a void. That idea culminates in one of the film's most significant scenes, the UN speech. It starts as a parody, a ridiculous defense of dictatorship. But as it goes on, the tone shifts. Aladdin begins listing the perks of authoritarianism: wealth concentrated among elites, manipulated media, endless surveillance, and the punchline lands like a punch to the gut. "Why are you people so against dictatorships?" he asks. "Imagine if America was a dictatorship." The audience laughs, nervously, because the satire is now a mirror. And what it reflects is unsettling. This is where the film's symbolism crystallizes. Aladdin, dressed in his full regalia, delivering a speech in a grand hall, becomes a dual figure, both clown and prophet. He's mocking tyranny while exposing how close supposedly free societies already are to it. The flags, the applause, the carefully staged spectacle. It's all a commentary on how power presents itself, even in democracies. One of the more subtle yet powerful symbols in the film is the urn of Kim Jong-il's ashes. Cohen used it as a prop during the real-world Oscars, dumping it on Ryan Seacrest in a viral stunt. But in the film, the urn is treated with reverence by Aladdin, until he spills it. Ashes scatter. Legacy lost. It's a moment that underlines the fragility of legacy, especially when built on fear. Dictators try to immortalize themselves, but in the end, their power is just dust in a jar. Even humor in the film functions symbolically. Every crude joke, every absurd statement, is more than just a punchline. It's a commentary on what power can make people accept. Aladdin's bizarre policies, like replacing every word with his name, are hilarious, but they also highlight how easily language can be manipulated. How systems of oppression often begin with the control of speech, of thought. In that way, laughter becomes resistance. It forces us to see what we might otherwise ignore. The recurring motif of mistaken identity also speaks volumes. Aladdin being confused for an ordinary man, or a terrorist, or a refugee, reflects the instability of labels. It reminds us how quickly society defines people based on context. The man who once ruled a nation is now a nobody. That fluidity is frightening, but also liberating. It means change is possible. Identities are not fixed. Tyrants can fall. And even they, under the right circumstances, can learn. But the film never pretends that transformation is easy or complete. Even as Aladdin seems to grow, to soften, to understand, the ending reminds us that old habits die hard. He reclaims his throne. He marries Zoe. And then, in the final moment, he slips back into his old mindset, asking whether their unborn child will be a boy or an abortion. The room falls silent. The laughter catches. Because it's a gut punch. A reminder. Change is not linear. And power, once tasted, is not easily relinquished. This ending is not pessimistic. It's honest. It tells us that dictators don't become saints overnight. That progress is complicated, messy, incomplete. It challenges the Hollywood notion of redemption, suggesting instead that awareness is the first step, and that even that is rare throughout the film. Visual symbols reinforce these ideas. The beard, the uniform, the golden statues, the propaganda posters. All of them are tools used to construct an identity, to command fear. But strip them away, and what's left? A man, confused and lost, standing in the middle of a world that no longer listens. And perhaps that's the most powerful theme of all, the fragility of power. The dictator may be absurd. It may be crude. But it never lets you forget that behind every strongman is a story, a fear, a lie believed too long. And that, sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't the tyrant. It's the silence that lets him speak without challenge. In the end, the film doesn't offer a solution. It offers a warning, wrapped in jokes, laced with irony, delivered through a dictator who never truly learns. And maybe that's what makes it stick. Sometimes a film doesn't just tell a story, it declares war on traditional storytelling. That's what The Dictator did. From its earliest frames, it made a clear promise. This wouldn't be a movie that played it safe. And behind that audacity, beneath the improvised jokes, the political satire, and the over-the-top performances, was a carefully orchestrated blend of filmmaking techniques, each designed to walk a razor-thin line between outrageous parody and sharp social commentary. To bring a fictional dictator to life in a way that felt both ridiculous and unervingly familiar, the filmmakers needed a style that embraced contradictions. The world of Admiral General Aladdin had to feel larger than life, and yet grounded enough that the audience could see the world they knew reflected, distorted, exaggerated, but undeniably present. Director Larry Charles, having worked with Sacha Baron Cohen before on Borat and Bruno, knew the formula required flexibility and chaos baked into every frame. The camera wasn't just an observer, it was a character, a co-conspirator, and sometimes a judge. But unlike Cohen's previous mockumentary-style works, The Dictator was fully scripted, which meant it had to marry traditional narrative filmmaking with the spontaneity of his improv-heavy performances. Cinematographer Lawrence Sher had a unique challenge. In Wadia, the fictional North African country ruled by Aladdin, The visual tone had to reflect unchecked ego and blind reverence. So the early scenes were drenched in color, warm golds, deep reds, stately greens. Lighting was soft but regal, evoking the look of state-controlled propaganda. Wide-angle shots gave Wadia a surreal scale. Aladdin's palace loomed in every frame, often shot from below, as if to elevate his already bloated presence. Everything was composed with symmetry, a visual nod to the control and precision dictators often impose on their environments. When Aladdin is in power, so is the frame, perfect, measured, unchallenged. But then everything changes. When Aladdin is deposed and dumped in New York City without his identity or beard, the camera shifts with him. Handheld techniques begin to dominate. The framing gets tighter, more claustrophobic. The camera shakes slightly, not in a documentary way, but enough to create unease. There's an intentional sloppiness that mirrors Aladdin's unraveling. The lighting becomes colder. Fluorescents buzz in co-op backrooms. The sun is too harsh on city sidewalks. The grandeur of Wadia disappears, and reality sets in, ugly, disorganized, alive. This visual transition is subtle at first but undeniable by the midpoint of the film. And it's not just about location, it's about power. When Aladdin has control, the cinematography flatters him. When he loses it, the frame fights back. That fight continues in the editing room. Greg Hayden, the film's editor, had the Herculean task of crafting structure from hours of unpredictable material. Cohen's improv often veered into wildly different tones, from slapstick absurdity to biting political jabs, within a single scene. Hayden had to find rhythm in the chaos. His cuts are fast but never rushed, allowing punchlines to land while keeping the momentum of the narrative intact. Reaction shots are timed with precision, especially when the comedy relies on someone else realizing just how insane Aladdin's behavior is. The pacing is relentless. Scenes don't meander. They pounce, strike, and move on. Even when jokes fall flat, which Cohen fully expected would happen, the editing never dwells long enough for the misstep to linger. It's a strategy of controlled momentum, and it works. Because in a film this bold, stalling is death. The audience needs to be carried, not dragged, through the satire. Sound, too, plays a crucial role in shaping the world. Sacha Baron Cohen, Sacha's brother, composed the film's score. It walks a tightrope between parody and pastiche, blending militaristic fanfares with Middle Eastern musical motifs, often in humorous contrast. The anthems of Wadia, which play over speeches and parades, are bloated with brass and synthetic choirs, mimicking real-world propaganda music but always with a wink. If you listen closely, you'll notice the lyrics, often unintelligible to English speakers, are gibberish. It doesn't matter. The tone does all the talking. When Aladdin is in power, the sound design inflates around him. Speeches are echoey, godlike. Every door slam and boot step carries weight. But in New York, the sound flattens. Suddenly, the city is louder than he is. Honking cars, murmuring crowds, subway rumbles, they all drown him out. It's no accident that his voice seems quieter, more strained, during his time in exile. He's not just powerless. He's voiceless. In one standout scene, Aladdin and Nadal, his former nuclear scientist turned sidekick, ride a tour helicopter over Manhattan. They speak Arabic, laughing, gesturing at landmarks. The other passengers misinterpret their words as threats. The tension builds not through dialogue, but through sound. A subtle swell of music, a shift in ambient noise, a tightening of breaths and gasps. It's comedy born from discomfort, and the audio mix does as much of the heavy lifting as the visuals. The film also leans heavily on contrast. That's the core technique behind much of its power: juxtaposition. A grand military parade followed by a goat chewing on a flag. A speech about democracy delivered in the most undemocratic tone imaginable. Cohen is a master of contrasts. He knows that placing sincerity next to absurdity heightens both. And the film structure is built on this rhythm. Big to small, power to powerlessness, myth to man. There's also the matter of production design. The palace interiors are absurdly ornate, but they're also telling. The walls are plastered with paintings of Aladdin saving the world. His bedroom features portraits of himself shirtless, flexing, with quotes attributed to him. "I made a woman have an orgasm once. It was terrible." Every piece of decor is a reflection of vanity. The camera lingers just long enough to let you take in the joke before moving on. Meanwhile, the co-op is cramped, unglamorous. Posters for social justice hang next to leaking pipes. It's not just a physical contrast, it's a philosophical one. The palace is a monument to control. The co-op is messy, democratic, real. And the way both are shot underscores that divide. In the palace, the frame is composed. In the co-op, it's reactive. The film's visual comedy often hinges on scale. Aladdin's entrances are grand, staircases, slow motion, wide shots. But the situations he walks into are usually beneath that grandeur. He'll strut into a room, expecting adulation, only to be ignored or mocked. The camera lets us experience the disconnect between his self-perception and the world's reaction. This technique gives the audience power. We're in on the joke before the character is. When it comes to visual symbolism, the dictator rarely whispers. The beard is the most obvious. It's his power, his mask, his myth. When it's shaved, it's as if he's been unmasked. For much of the film, the camera avoids showing his full face without it. Only later, once he's begun to grow, if not morally, then at least emotionally, do we start to see him clearly again. Even his uniform tells a story. It evolves. At first, it's pristine, over-decorated, absurd. By the end, it's slightly more understated, still theatrical, but no longer treated as sacred. He wears it like a costume, not a skin. It's a subtle shift, but an important one. And the filmmakers reinforce this through lighting, posture, and framing. And then there's the ending. Sudden, shocking, deliberately jarring. After reclaiming power and proposing to Zoe, Aladdin asks whether their child will be a boy or an abortion. The camera doesn't cut. It holds. The music doesn't swell. It stops. The laughter dies. And we're left with a question. Was any of it real? Did he grow? Or did he just learn how to fake it better? That moment is pure filmmaking sleight of hand. It's a reveal, not of plot, but of character. The entire film builds toward the possibility of change. And then it reminds us, some tyrants don't transform. They adapt. The way it's shot, no music, no visual cue to tell us how to feel, leaves us stranded in the ambiguity. It's one of the most honest things the film does. From a box office standpoint, The Dictator was a modest success. With a budget around $65 million, it grossed over $175 million worldwide. Not a juggernaut, but a respectable performance for a film so politically charged. Critics were split. Some praised its audacity, its satire, its guts. Others found it crude, uneven, or lacking the raw genius of Borat. But everyone agreed, it took risks. And in a comedy landscape increasingly afraid of offending, that alone was something worth noting. Ultimately, the techniques that shaped The Dictator, its bold visuals, its kinetic editing, its shifting camera styles and pointed sound design, weren't just for laughs. They were weapons, tools used to explore how power presents itself, how identity can be a costume, and how, sometimes, the only way to understand tyranny is to laugh at it first. And that's the magic of filmmaking that dares to disturb the peace. Some films are remembered for their stories, others for their stars. But occasionally, a film is remembered because its cast stepped so deeply into their roles that the line between actor and character blurred entirely. The Dictator is one of those films. From the moment Admiral General Aladdin marched into the public eye, real or fictional, the world took notice. But behind that loud, divisive, and absurdly entertaining mask was a group of actors, creators, and audiences all experiencing something far stranger and more layered than the film's chaos might suggest. At the center of it all stood Sacha Baron Cohen, and not for the first time, he wasn't just playing a role. He was embodying a concept, a fully realized, deeply offensive, bizarrely magnetic dictator who never broke character, on set or off. Every interview, every red carpet, every awards appearance, Cohen didn't show up as himself. He showed up as Aladdin, complete with faux military regalia, an entourage of fake bodyguards, and a thick accent that shifted somewhere between Middle Eastern parody and theatrical bravado. The press tour alone was its own performance art. One minute he was dumping fake ashes on Ryan Seacrest's tuxedo at the Oscars. The next, he was issuing official Wadian decrees, banning certain celebrities from his fictional country. Interviewers never quite knew whether they were being played, insulted, or both. On the Today Show, Cohen, in character, referred to Matt Lauer as a Zionist spy, prompting both laughter and nervous glances from the control booth. When asked why he stayed in character for interviews, Cohen responded, with full sincerity, that Aladdin has diplomatic immunity. Behind the scenes, though, Cohen was a relentless craftsman. Cast members have since reflected on how committed he was to the work, even when that meant chaos ruled the set. Anna Faris, who played the sharp-tongued, socially conscious Zoe, described her experience on set as both exhilarating and exhausting. "You never knew what he was going to say next," she recalled in one interview. "I would come in with my lines, prepared, and suddenly he'd launch into a 5-minute rant about veganism or feminism from Aladdin's perspective. And I just had to keep up." Faris's performance is deceptively simple. Her character often serves as the audience's moral compass, but she plays off Cohen's unpredictability with quiet strength. She grounds the satire, giving it just enough humanity to tether the absurdity. Critics praised her timing, her restraint, and the chemistry she shared with Cohen, which was laced less with romantic energy and more with philosophical tension. Then there was Sir Ben Kingsley. Yes, that Ben Kingsley, the Oscar-winning icon known for Gandhi and Schindler's List. When the casting was first announced, many questioned what Kingsley was doing in a Cohen-led political satire. But the answer became clear the moment he appeared on screen. Kingsley brought gravitas to Tamir, Aladdin's cunning uncle, elevating scenes with his steely presence and uncanny ability to play it straight. Even as chaos unfolded around him in interviews, Kingsley admitted he was drawn to the project precisely because it was outside his wheelhouse. "It's healthy," he said, "for actors to risk looking ridiculous. Comedy is as serious as drama, and in some ways, even harder." On set, he reportedly kept a calm demeanor, offering a quiet counterbalance to Cohen's tornado-like energy. He embraced the satire, leaned into the absurdity, and made Tamir believable in a world where nothing else was. Jason Mantzoukas, playing the exiled nuclear scientist Nadal, was a breakout comedic presence. His character, once condemned to death by Aladdin for minor disagreements, becomes the dictator's unlikely ally. Mantzoukas' quick wit and sharp delivery made him a natural fit for Cohen's improvisational style. "It was like playing jazz," he said in a podcast interview. "Sacha would riff, I'd riff back. We'd go completely off script, and sometimes those moments made the final cut." The supporting cast, from Bobby Lee to Asif Mandvi, brought a richness to the world around Aladdin. Each performer was given space to carve out comedic beats, even within the tightly controlled structure of satire. They didn't just serve the plot, they reflected the absurdity of those who orbit around power, nodding along even when the emperor has no clothes. The cast dynamic was intense but affectionate. They had to trust each other, especially during improvised scenes that danced dangerously close to taboo. There was laughter, of course, but also an understanding. The film was walking a tightrope. It had to be fearless, but never careless. And that required a kind of mutual respect and alertness that many actors never experience on traditional sets. Audience reception, unsurprisingly, was divided. Some viewers adored the film's audacity. They saw it as a necessary counterweight to a world growing increasingly careful and sanitized. For them, The Dictator was a breath of offensive, politically incorrect fresh air, a satire that dared to say what others wouldn't. Online forums buzzed with quote threads, gifs of Aladdin's many outrageous moments, and debates about which of Cohen's characters, Borat, Bruno, or Aladdin, was the most iconic.